realize that, we've had such terrible loss of life. Maybe the smartest thing to do is pull it. And they made that decision to pull. So then we watched the building collapse.
They ignored it because they wanted it to happen. Every gun starts with a false flag operation.
In a global and totalitarian war, intelligence must be global and totalitarian. William J. Donovan, founder of the O.S.S. Hello, and welcome back to Historica Esoterica. I am your host, Matt K. Ultra, joined once again by...
It's me, Roswell.
Hey, Roswell.
Hello.
So let's just jump into letting everybody know what we're doing. So today's episode is a bit of a change of pace from the last one. We had our spooky fun with grimoires. We looked into these books of spirits and really just spent, I think, an hour going, magic is real and you shouldn't do it. Which,
Yes.
to be clear, is still our stance.
Yes. And now we're looking into something much less scary.
Yeah, which is to say, the O.S.S. Something which is also real and, frankly, shouldn't be done. Global intelligence. So yeah, we're gonna try to do this. Just sort of jump back and forth between topics. Something a little spooky sometimes, something a little terrifying sometimes. We'll different vibes, but
Yeah.
that's okay. So yeah, I guess I'll jump into it. I actually have notes this time. Dear listener, which I think is a welcome improvement from last episode. Okay, so I just want to start off. I'm just going to give a broad history before I dive into some notable people and operations. Roswell, I know that you've got your own notes as well. So, of course, feel free to jump in, ask questions, make comments. Fact check me if CIA.gov gave you any different information than my
I will.
my independent research.
Yeah, I think we should make brief mention of that. My primary source was from O.S.S, America's First Intelligence Agency, by Michael Warner, CIA history staff. And I imagine your research was not that.
My research was not that. I honestly, for a lot of this, I just used the Wikipedia as a springboard. It's a great source. If you ignore the fact that there are points in, especially the article on Donovan, where it was very clearly written by a Donovan stan.
Yeah.
You use that as a springboard. Sort of Google, like if you see a weird name come up, and then you click on the Wikipedia link, and they don't have a picture, you're like, well, let's do some research here.
Let's see who this is.
Let's see what's going on over here. But I did that. I pulled a lot of sources from the O.S.S Society, which, just like CIA.gov, I mean, Roswell can attest, I was going a little crazy, so I sort of I trimmed back those sources a bit. I also I pulled some quotes from Legacy of Ashes, A History of the CIA, which great name. I do not remember the author off the top of my head.
That is a sick title.
Yeah, there was a Washington Post. I gotta start saving my sources so I can remember where I get these things from.
Yeah, you need a bibliography.
Yeah, but it was a Washington Post article from the 80s that I used for my sources on one guy in particular. Those are my general sources.
Cool.
But yeah, if I wrote something down here, I read it somewhere. I promise. Just don't ask me where. Okay, so before we jump into the OSS, I do want to talk about the fact that before the founding of the OSS, there were several groups within the government that had done limited work collecting intelligence.
Right.
I don't know if you looked into this at all, but they'd never been officially sanctioned, and more importantly, they'd never been centralized under one person.
Right.
These intelligence agencies weren't central. So to speak. The IAs were not C yet. But so my favorite of these was the Black Chamber, which, aside from its terrifying name,
that is horrible,
it has the funniest reason for being broken up. So it was founded after World War One, and it was broken up by Secretary of State Henry Stimson because, and this is a direct quote, "Gentlemen don't read each other's mail," which
which is true.
it's true.
Gentlemen
Yeah.
do not read each other's mail.
Yeah, baller
Is
move
this-
to do that. But
Is this the same thing as the Cipher Bureau?
yes, so they like had like a
Dang.
couple different iterations, a couple different names, but my favorite was, of course, the Black Chamber.
The Black
just because,
Chambers.
like,
Oof.
it's so evocative. I mean,
Yeah.
I understand why they don't officially call it that, because that would be very
Yeah.
much a, I think, "Are we the baddies?" moment. Is like, you're wearing your skull robes, entering the Black Chamber, and like, wait a minute, I might be
Well-
on the wrong side here.
No. Couldn't be.
But all this is to say that the OSS officially, and I found two different dates on this, so you're going to have to tell me which one the CIA told you. Because the one that I saw come up more was July 11th, 1941.
Yes and no. The OSS didn't actually come about until 1942. I think.
Yeah, I was
the
going to say, they didn't
C-
like rename it. It was the COI first, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
which is the coordinator of information, which was more so a single person position.
Yeah, and then you were just part of his office, so to
Yes.
speak.
Of 600 people.
Yeah. But yeah, so that's when William J. Donovan really that's when
Yeah.
he started getting to throw his weight around. So
Yeah.
the OSS
Well-
Society called that its founding date. And then there were of course
Okay.
the other ones that like talk about when it was officially instituted as
Sure.
the Office of Strategic Services.
So, but before we get in that, I do want to say, right in line with what you're talking about with the Black Chamber. So, like, obviously, there was no centralized bodies doing intelligence. I thought this was interesting. Again, this is from the CIA, but they said pre-World War II, intelligence was primarily collected by attachés and diplomats,
Mhm.
and handled by the Office of Naval Intelligence and G2.
Yeah.
Information was shared across department lines all the way up to the president, which that kind of rang a little bell in my head,
Yeah.
compared to today's. But I thought that was interesting that they made no mention of any of the other informal organizations,
Mhm.
which makes sense. But
Yeah, and so it's also worth noting, diplomats, ambassadors, businessmen, all those people used to spy for the government, but they don't
Right.
anymore.
no, of course
we're-
not.
We're going to be saying that a lot throughout this episode. Is if you hear the OSS doing something and you think, I wonder if the CIA kept doing that. Nope, they didn't. I promise.
No.
They
Yeah.
stopped. They're not doing any of it.
And if they did, we support it.
Yeah. Don't you think they'd tell us?
Of course, yeah. No.
Yeah, they're famously open about these sorts of things.
Yeah.
But yeah, so it had limited activities in like Japan in that front, like the Pacific front, but
Well, yeah.
primarily it was used in Europe.
Yeah,
in
and
efforts
it should
against the
be said,
Nazis.
yeah, this is the height of World War II is when the COI is getting established.
Yeah,
And so I think that context is important. Can I read you a quote about what the COI was from the CIA
absolutely.
themselves?
Yeah, please.
Okay. This is from my main source, again, from Michael Warner, CIA history staff. So it's, quote, "The COI constituted the nation's first peacetime, non-departmental intelligence organization. Franklin Delano Roosevelt, the then president, authorized the COI to collect and analyze all info and data which may bear upon national security, and to make such information available to the president and to such departments and officials as the president may determine." End quote. Interesting, right? Yeah. I think that those mays are doing a lot of legwork.
Yeah, there's little eyebrow raises there.
Yeah. Nothing concrete, but it does make you kind of go, and another thing, just right in line with this, when talking about like the mindset that went into the founding of the OSS, Major General John Singlaub, who anyone who's familiar with the Iran-Contra scandal might recognize that name.
You might know this guy. You're going to see a lot of characters.
a
Friendly
lot of
fa-
repeating.
it's sort of like, imagine if like Infinity War was like a
Yeah.
prequel movie that
Yes.
established all the characters in the MCU. It's like that,
Yeah.
but for this podcast. A lot of maybe not
Yes.
friendly, but familiar faces who we'll be seeing again pop up in these stories. Exactly, yeah. Portals
as
playing.
as
Uh,
Dulles just like trips his way through a portal, Kramering into the um, but so Singlaub, I think he put it best. This is from a video interview I saw with him. He said that that FDR needed a organization to handle things that could be done, quote, without the full consent of Congress, end quote. Which, before we go full, like on that,
Before you cut me loose.
my I think it's it should be said, America, famous bureaucracy, right?
One of the most famous ones,
One of the most
arguably.
famous ones, yeah. But like, if you look at like what FDR had to do during World War II, like he was getting caught up on a lot of red tape to try and get stuff accomplished. So to get anything done quickly, which you'd need to do in wartime, you kind of had to, or he kind of had to step over some of the congressional boundaries, and he did.
Yeah,
Which
many times.
Which you can say good or bad. I mean, it was effective in a war, but
Yeah.
maybe not the best precedent to set for a agency that you're starting.
Yeah, and so there's a couple things that I sort of like themes in keeping with what you were just saying. There's a couple themes I sort of want to hit on as we go through this episode and this little story that I've set up, this little narrative I've strung together as a little spider. And one of them is sort of that, right? Like this all started, at least most of it started, as a as a effort to stop the Nazis, right? So
Right.
I'm going to come
Good.
out and say it. I'm going to be a lot more lenient with you if you're doing bad things, if those bad things are to the Waffen SS, right?
That's if you're, it's kind of like if you watched Indiana Jones like punch a guy in a supermarket, you'd be like, ugh. But if you watch him punch a literal Nazi, you're like, nice.
Yeah, okay, yeah, exactly.
And I think that's how to think about it.
Yeah, and so my problems with these things, because some of these things I'm going to talk about are things they designed explicitly to use on Nazis. And if
Right.
I'm like, if I'm sort of like voicing qualms, I want to be clear. My qualms are not with them being used against the Third
Sure.
Reich. It's the fact that they didn't stop being used there. It's that these things then were brought home and used on, like civil rights activists, which if Indiana Jones is like chasing down like people doing sit-in protests, I'm going to be a little, I'm going to raise my eyebrows at him. What's he up to?
I thought Harrison Ford's cameo in Judas and the Black Messiah was a bit strange. It was a bit strange.
Yeah, just like Han Solo, he asks that they kill him at the end. But yeah. So
is there anything else you want to say on the COI? Because I have some more information before it fully transitions into the OSS.
Yeah, sure. Go ahead. I sort of blurred a lot of it together because that's what several of my sources did that, where they were sort of like, hey, it's basically the same thing. So I blended them together just in the interest of making it easier on myself. But please go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted to according to, again, Singlaub, Major General John Singlaub, he said this. One of the main goals of the CIA was to help the American media distinguish between, quote, propaganda coming from the enemy sources and real news, end quote, which would go on to be taken over by the Office of War.
Good.
Yeah. Its other goals included clandestine intelligence, espionage, counter-espionage. So, again, you're kind of seeing how this might evolve eventually into the CIA. But something that's very interesting is as the COI, Donovan had the authority to use unvouchered expenditures from the president's emergency fund.
Oh.
What are unvouchered expenditures? Well, according to whitehouse.archives.gov, unvouchered expenditures are any expenditure accounted for solely on the approval, authorization, or certificate of the president or an official of the executive branch, which is to say magic money that only the president can use.
And I'm sure none of it disappeared.
Absolutely.
Didn't go where it was supposed to.
And again, according to the CIA website, these funds, along with the espionage authority granted to the COI by the military, quote, planted the seed of the modern CIA's director of operations, end quote.
Oh, good.
In my notes, I wrote eye emoji.
Yeah.
And to
yeah,
gloss over the budget real quick, just to wrap this point up before we can move on, I
Yeah,
just
for
want to
sure.
note that the COI, before it transitioned to the OSS, this would change, but the initial budget in 1942 was a $10 million budget, which, if we adjust for inflation in 2022,
I was about to ask.
is $184 million, which
Dear Lord.
is not a lot if we compare it to what the United States intelligence programs today are, which is $62.3 billion from the National Intelligence Program and $23.3 billion from the Military Intelligence Program, for a grand total of $85.6 billion in 2022. That is the CIA budget.
Well, I can't think of any other places that money could be going, personally.
Yes.
Yeah.
Oh.
Wow.
And I found the exact date. According to the CIA, they transitioned from COI to OSS on June 13th, 1942.
Yeah, that was the other date that I found.
So that was the transition. So, they were essentially the same thing, but the name change and where it changed from a, kind of a seat of power with 600 employees to a department with, at its peak, 13,000 employees.
Yeah. I actually read 24,000
Interesting.
people around the world. Yeah. I believe that one was from the Washington Post article, but now I can't remember, and I'm regretting not including my sources.
This is again from the CIA, but 13,000 Americans. So I don't know.
Okay. Yeah. No. Yeah.
I don't
this
know if
was.
That's
Yeah. So at the height of its power, it was 24,000 people around the world, which is like including resistance operatives and people.
So wow, almost 11,000 foreigners that they got involved. Pretty interesting.
And again, I'm sure all those people just stopped working for them the moment the OSS was dissolved.
Oh yeah, of course. Yeah, why wouldn't they?
Yeah, you just forget about your connections like that.
Yeah. You go back to being a plumber.
Yeah, so it was dissolved just over a month after the end of the war. Truman did not want this thing to stick around, for whatever reason. I can't imagine why a sitting president would be nervous about the existence of a centralized intelligence agency. They've always gotten along so well.
Yeah.
But
well, and I think that was good foresight considering there's a great maybe we can come back to this when we go over the end of the OSS in depth.
Yeah, for sure.
I can go over it now. It's up to you.
Go ahead. Yeah, might as well. While we're doing this, because this is our broad strokes, right?
Sure. So I'll again quote this CIA document, which cited the end of the OSS as, quote, an end and a beginning, end quote, which I don't think was meant to be ominous, but is.
Yeah,
very ominous.
The Ouroboros began there. It's like, well.
So here's a quote from the CIA on the end of the OSS. It says, quote, General Donovan was a charismatic leader and empire builder who inspired his people, but he was also a mediocre administrator, enamored of operations but bored by procedural detail. Tales of OSS inefficiency and waste, some of them true, delighted Donovan's critics. He had tirelessly battled bureaucratic rivals in Washington and London, but as the war drew to an end, his enemies began to fear that he might actually win his campaign to create a peacetime intelligence service modeled on the OSS. President Roosevelt made no promises. However, after his death in April of 1945, the incoming president, Harry S. Truman, felt no obligation to save the OSS. Victory in Europe in May 1945 allowed the OSS to concentrate on Japan, but it also meant months of bureaucratic limbo for Washington headquarters. President Truman disliked Donovan. Truman mocked him in his diary, perhaps fearing that Donovan's proposed intelligence establishment might one day be used against Americans, end quote. And I just want
Can I just say,
it never was.
Thank God it never was. Yeah, he succeeded, and that's where the end of the episode ends. Actually, we don't need to talk about it anymore.
18 minutes, that's all it took. But I mean, that last line is particularly egregious considering it came from the CIA website.
Yeah, which, it's very like a Mr. Police, I gave you all the clues. I cannot believe that they included that in their website.
Signed from hell.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So, that feeds right into your point. I think, and you say what you will about Truman, sure, probably that was a bit self-motivated on his part, but also, I mean, he was right.
Yeah,
Probably not a great idea to establish this powerful and clandestine of a, you know,
I'm glad that
bureaucratic
you.
entity.
Yeah, I'm glad that you noted early on that Donovan and Truman didn't get along well, because
Yeah.
when I talk about Donovan, I have a couple little stories there that I think,
Interesting.
because I have a couple. I've crafted several arcs for us throughout this little thing that I've made,
I love
and
that.
Donovan in particular has a sort of smaller one, the only one that I would consider a morality play out of my little stories here for us. But so now that we've covered the broad strokes, right? We talked about the
Yeah.
budget, we talked about that. I want
Yeah.
to zero in on a couple people,
Okay.
notably a group that I like to call the Three Williams, and one special surprise guest at the end who we'll talk about for a
Ooh.
little bit.
Okay.
So the first William I want to talk about is one William Stevenson. Did he come up in your research at all?
I saw the name, but I couldn't tell you who he is.
So he is actually a name that I knew already,
Oh no.
because William Stevenson is said to be the man that Ian Fleming based James Bond off of. He is
Interesting.
sort of like the first super spy. This guy had like every single medal that you can give someone. He did it. He was in all sorts of like battles, all sorts of operations. But where I really want to start talking about him, he was a prisoner of war in World War One. Became a self-made millionaire because he developed like a can opener patent that he sold to Germany, and then like he tweaked it and sold it to the rest of Europe as well. And
Okay.
it's so this was before he was 30, so he's one of the first 30 under 30 out there. Just
Media luminary.
yeah, media
Yeah.
luminary, really. Well, it's
Now,
funny
is
we should
this?
say that.
Oh,
Well, I was just gonna say we'll get into his maybe his troll campaigns that he launched to influence things. Say, we'll get into those later. But what were you saying?
I was gonna say, as you might imagine, on Wikipedia, there's a lot of William Stevensons,
Yes.
especially in government and politics.
My favorite fact about that is that William Stevenson, he's Sir William Stevenson, if that helps at all. He was
The
knighted.
governor
Uh,
of Mauritius. No, that couldn't be.
yeah, no.
That guy
His
died in
code name was
1863.
his code name was Intrepid, if that helps you. But most
Okay.
interestingly, speaking of how common William Stevenson is, Sir
Yeah.
William Stevenson, one of his like most official biographies, "The Man Called Intrepid," was written by an unrelated William Stevenson. Which like
That's gotta be illegal.
I know you can't do that. Like the whole time you're like, wow, yeah, William Stevenson was so cool and handsome, and everyone loved him.
Okay.
The end.
Oh,
But
so he's Stevenson with a PH.
oh
Okay.
yes, PH. Sorry, I forgot to clarify.
No, that's fine.
But
Here's
yeah,
interesting. Well, okay, I was gonna say, like, does the CIA like make up fake names all the time? Because his birth name is William Samuel Clouston Stanger.
yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, it's the same as
Hmm.
maybe later on we'll touch on the JFK assassination and the two
Ah,
George Bush working at the CIA. For some reason, they really
right.
like having lots of people sharing names. But
Yeah.
but anyway,
Hmm.
so he, as the Second World War started ramping up, America, despite what we like to pretend, we were not involved in this war for very long.
Right.
We jumped on the tail end, and
Yeah.
admittedly, they needed us to. But
Yes.
for a long time, it was just sort of like Britain and France, and then it was
Right.
just sort of Britain. There were obviously other countries. I'm not trying to diminish any of
Maybe a
their.
little bit of Russia.
Yeah, maybe a little bit of Russia towards the, but on the European front, like not
Right.
the. Yeah, it
Right.
was really like Britain was leading the charge and taking the biggest hits, like from the V2 rockets
Right.
and all sorts of things like that.
Right.
And America, actually, for a long time, was in favor of effectively neutrality,
Right.
because we had just done World War One, which, to be clear, I think World War One was much less justifiable than World War Two, right? Where it was really just a
Yeah.
bunch of cousins getting mad at each other and killing millions of people as a result. And America didn't really want anything to do with Europe after that. World War One was a very unpopular war.
Yeah, which is absolutely fair.
Yeah. And William Stevenson was the man tasked by British intelligence to create a British network of intelligence throughout the Western Hemisphere. And specifically, this thing, he's not only was he tasked with this, but he's frequently credited with succeeding at this, which is to say, changing American opinion from isolationism to a pro-war stance during World War II. And the methods that he used for doing so were crazily diverse. He had millions of dollars at his disposal, not just his own, but also like government and from his various businesses, all of which he was using. And like one of my favorites that I found was the Hearst Syndicate, which you may know as being run by one William Randolph Hearst, who I believe was the inspiration for goodness, I'm blanking on it now. Citizen Kane, if I recall correctly.
Right, that's right.
But yeah, the Hearst Syndicate was in favor of isolationism for a long time, and they made plans to just drive them out of business. They just shut down the entire conglomerate by basically cashing in a bunch of like debts that they were owed all at once, and like forcing them into bankruptcy. And judging by the fact that we know the name William Randolph Hearst, they didn't go through with this. But that was like one of the things they were planning. They also, I found one quote that I want to read, which is like the more petty end of things that they were doing, because America also just had like Nazi supporters, like open supporters in there.
Right. Well, there's people don't know this, but there's a lot of German people in America. If you've ever been to Cincinnati, which I lived in briefly.
Yeah, there's a lot of German people, and a lot of them were feeling pretty pro-German during this war with Germany. Imagine that.
Imagine that.
But so this is an interesting memo in which William Stevenson seems to have invented gang stalking, or at least his office. I don't think he personally wrote this, but here's a good quote. A Nazi, quote, can be telephoned at all hours of the night, and when awakened can be apologetically assured that it's the wrong number. The air can mysteriously disappear out of his motor car tires. Shops can be telephoned on his behalf and asked to deliver large quantities of useless and cumbersome goods. Payment on delivery. Masses of useless correspondence can reach him without stamps, so that he is constantly having to pay out petty sums of money. His lady friend can receive an anonymous letter stating that he's suffering from a mysterious disease, or that he is keeping a woman and 6 children in Detroit. He can be cabled, apparently genuine instructions to make long, expensive journeys. A rat might die in his water tank. Street musicians might play God Save the King outside his house all night. His favorite dog might get lost. With a little thought, it should be possible to invent at least 500 ways of persecuting a victim without the persecutor compromising himself.
So he got all of his ideas from Mad Magazine?
Yeah, exactly. But it's crazy, right? Like he invented gang stalking.
Essentially. He was the blueprint for male manipulators everywhere.
Yeah, and he's listening to Tame Impala as he's writing this out.
It's just one guy, right?
Did you know that the COI was just one guy?
I was just thinking that.
But so after a little while of Stevenson and his buddies, just palling around America, doing what they're doing, Americans, particularly J. Edgar Hoover, head of the FBI, grew a little bit frustrated and suspicious of their snooping and outright propaganda, and started saying like, "Hey, we should remove them." And coincidentally, right around this point, William Stevenson suggests to FDR that his friend William J. Donovan head a centralized intelligence network in America, and he effectively handed over the reins to someone that the British could trust. They referred to him in their correspondences as "our man." And
so that's really interesting. Oh, go ahead. Sorry.
I was going to say, does any of this sound familiar? These intelligence agencies setting up people who they think will be useful for them, and then those people sort of go off and do their own thing. It's all I could think of. My notes just say, the that like 80s PSA. It's like, where did you learn this stuff? I learned it from you, Dad. Like that's what I was thinking of as I was reading that. Yeah. It's like it's the blueprint. This is what we do. We've done this so many times, and that's how it started.
So can I contrast that with the CIA's?
Yes, please go right ahead.
I'm not going to quote it, but I will say in their write-up of like Donovan, consulting with FDR, they really make it sound like it's Donovan's idea. And they really make it sound like, he was just out in Britain and in France, and he was like doing all these things with, he was, they talk about how closely related he was with the British. But then there's like, he picked up a lot of ideas from them and then came back and suggested to FDR, that better intelligence was needed. And so that just strikes me as interesting, where it's like, yeah, it was Donovan's idea, whereas I feel like your side of it seems a lot more likely.
Yeah, that Stevenson sort of he was the one, he had the training wheels on the bike, at least, for
Right,
Donovan.
exactly. And I mean, not to say that like Donovan's a pawn of Stevenson, but like,
Yeah.
all these people are bumping into each other, and that's just very interesting. Another thing that was interesting, and this is just a little footnote, but Donovan, before COI, before his run-ins with FDR, he served as the Assistant Attorney General during the Coolidge administration.
Oh, yes, he did.
Briefly supervised a young. Do you want to guess who?
Oh, hang on, wait. I think I saw this. Let me see if it's in my notes.
You just mentioned
I'm not
him.
seeing it. No, go right ahead. I'm blanking. Oh, was it J. Edgar Hoover?
It was a young J. Edgar Hoover and his then new FBI.
Very interesting.
So,
okay.
I mean, if you're gonna pick a guy to consult with FDR and to quell, someone who's mad at you in that government, a guy who has a relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, and like kind of a, I don't want to say fatherly, but like as a superior.
Yeah, he has that position of power already. That sort of dynamic is there. And to be clear, no one had a good relationship with J. Edgar Hoover, right? Like, that man had files on literally, like, if you were an American and, like, breathed, J. Edgar Hoover at one point in time was, like, writing it down and trying to, like, keep track of it.
He was like Batman. He was like, trying, he
yeah, in many ways, he was like the Batman.
He was dressing up at night.
I'm
sorry.
Ooh, that's a little deep cut for our listeners.
Yeah.
And we'll that was good.
Move on from that.
But yeah, so that brings us to the second of the three Williams, William J. Donovan, who, to be clear, he was, like, in his own right, he was doing his own things. It's not like Stevenson just sort of, like, set him up, right? So prior to his time in the OSS, he spent time traveling the world, working. The one that brought, like, my attention the most was he worked for J.P. Morgan, and while he did so, he was gathering information on international communism. So, cool to know that.
So he worked for a big capitalist learning about communism. And
I'm sure the things that he collected were completely unbiased and not from any one ideological perspective.
You would say that, you Marxist freak.
He also, interestingly, I'd just like to note, a lot of the people we're going to be talking about here, they're the waspiest wasps to ever wasp, right? They're white, they're Anglo-Saxon, and oh boy, are they Protestant. My boy Donovan,
does
though.
P stand for Protestant?
Yeah.
I thought it stood for person. I thought it was like white Anglo-Saxon person.
We all learned something today.
I'm so stupid.
But yeah, and so, but Donovan, to his credit, was an Irish Catholic, which doesn't come up at all later. But anyway, so he, like I said, he was working around. He was also very much in favor of prohibition, which I thought was interesting. When he was he angered the elites of Buffalo, New York, when he had agents raid a club that they frequented and confiscate all their alcohol. Which I guess would be around the same time he was
running for governor,
Hoover, I believe. Yeah, and he was running for governor
as the Republican candidate.
Yeah, he ran as a Republican right after FDR became president. But afterwards, he and FDR grew to have a respect for each other. They became friends, and that's why Donovan was sort of floating around the cabinet, because they did respect each other. I believe it was FDR who said later on in life that if Donovan had run as a Democrat, he could have won the presidency.
Interesting.
Which I'm not going to go anywhere near implications of Democrats being intelligence assets running for presidencies, but we'll just leave that one out there. So I'm sorry, we promised not to do topical things. That's on me. But
is that
so
topical?
No, not anymore.
Because I was just thinking of the Clintons.
There's the Clintons. I was thinking half of the 2020 primaries, but that was 2
Looking at
years
you,
ago.
Pete, Buttigieg.
I'm looking at you, Pete. What were you doing with that AR-15? But anyway,
Holding it wrong.
yeah, we can cut that if you want to.
No,
But,
it's fine.
so interestingly, something I thought I was pleasantly surprised by, Donovan was opposed to Japanese internment. And he,
Okay.
correctly, I would like to note, he
Yeah.
believed that it solved a problem that did not exist and needlessly harmed loyal American citizens. Which,
Dang.
yeah, Bill,
So-
you're right.
Was Donovan based?
I wouldn't go that far, but
Okay.
at times, yeah, like, he
At
did.
That
He did hate
is, like-
Nazis. He was against Japanese internment.
Yeah,
unlike
I mean-
woke Bay FDR. So
Yep.
we've got that at least.
Yeah, that's very interesting.
And also to his credit, I want to have a couple, things to Donovan's credit. He wasn't a chicken hawk, right? Like he was out there on the front lines during the war.
No, he was a military man, and he wanted to. After Pearl Harbor, he wanted to go back into the fray, but because of an old war wound, he wasn't able to, and that kind of led his way into bureaucracy.
The more spooky
This more
avenues.
spooky side. Yeah,
But yeah, there was
turned to
one.
the dark side.
I believe this was actually during like D-Day in Normandy. I don't remember exactly when this happened, but a story I found that I thought was a good description of Donovan's character is he and another OSS officer were pinned down by machine gun fire in France. And
Interesting.
Donovan stated that they could not be captured because they knew too much. And so he reached for the 2 suicide pills he kept on him, but realized that they weren't on him and said, "I must shoot first." And so when his companion asked him what good their pistols were against the machine gun fire, Donovan replied, and this is a direct quote, "Oh, you don't understand. I'm in if we are about to be captured. I'll shoot you first. After all, I am your commanding officer."
No.
Which, that's the sort of guy Donovan was, right? He was a true blue warrior, and he believed in what he was doing. But I read that quote and I was like, "Oh, I've got to do this one, on the episode."
That's like if you're gonna have a guy in charge of harming your enemy as much as possible. I mean,
you want someone like that.
Yeah, it's understandable why you would want him in the COI, later OSS position.
Yeah, because I mean, this is a man, like ice flows through his veins. Like that's not a normal human being.
This guy,
he's crazy.
That's insane.
There's a reason they called him Wild Bill, right? Like,
Right.
that was his nickname.
Man.
And so, jumping forward a little bit, after the war, Donovan collaborated with Supreme Court Justice Robert Jackson, building cases against Nazi officials in the Nuremberg trials.
Okay.
Although they eventually had a falling out because Jackson wanted to prosecute all of the Nazi high command, and Donovan felt that was unfair. Which,
okay, see, that to me seems like a compromise of belief from the man we just talked about a second ago.
yeah, exactly.
But-
It's like, he's a strange character, right? Where he's like, well, they didn't all commit war crimes. Some of them were just committing normal war.
Yeah. Which I think shines a light on what he thinks normal war is, right?
Exactly. Yeah. It's
Yeah.
it's very
Fascinating.
interesting. So following his several unsuccessful attempts to preserve the OSS, he returned to private law practice and served as some chair of something called the American Committee on United Europe, which served to prevent communist influence in Western Europe by arguing for a union of European states, effectively. Which,
Like, would you say a European Union?
I mean, perhaps. Who knows? Who knows what exactly they were going for here? Interestingly,
Interesting.
his vice chair on this committee was one Alan Dulles, a character who we'll get to a little later. So he lobbied Congress to allow for the creation of the CIA, and following I forgot to write it down. They briefly created like an agency that was like not quite as good as the CIA.
Yeah,
and for a
CIG,
year it was really
right?
Yeah, I think it was CIG. I can't believe I forgot to write it down.
Yeah, I
But
didn't put it in
basically,
either.
following the failure of that, he had a direct hand in building the CIA and suggested a lot of its staffers seemed to, heavily imply that, well, there's one guy who's fit for the job of running this, right? It's me. It's William J. Donovan. Put me in
Right.
charge. But he did not get that job. And like you said, Truman hated Donovan and thought of him as a little meddler, because Donovan, while he was working as like ambassador in various countries or during his private law practice, would just sort of like float around the CIA headquarters and like try and give them advice and like connections. And Truman hated it. He like thought like, this guy knows nothing. He's just over the hill, basically.
Right. He's the guy who comes back to high school the year after graduating.
Yeah, exactly. He's like hanging out with the teachers again.
Exactly.
But during the 1952 presidential election, and again, what I'm about to say is not something that will ever happen again, Donovan campaigned for his friend Eisenhower, hoping that he would be able to use that to curry favor and secure his leadership of the CIA afterwards. But instead, Eisenhower appointed our boy, Allen Dulles, whose brother, John Foster Dulles, was the new Secretary of State. And functionally, I mean, this is where I view it as the beginning of the end for Donovan, right? Like, younger, fresher faces have shouldered him out. You know, the era of Dulles was beginning, and Donovan's star had effectively began to fade. 'Cause he worked as an ambassador to Thailand for a couple years, and then in 1957, he was hospitalized for dementia. Most interestingly, hallucinating the Red Army invading Manhattan during his time in the hospital, and fleeing it, wandering around the streets at night in his pajamas. Which, this is what I'm saying. Like the mini arc that I wanted to talk about with Donovan.
Yeah,
Like, this is what awaits you as an intelligence officer, right? Is like it's a life of, you know, it's a paranoia. You get shouldered out the moment you become the moment that someone more useful shows up, and you spend your last days like looking over your shoulder, chasing threats that don't exist.
Yeah.
After his death,
poignant.
Final note about Donovan.
Yeah.
After his death, the CIA sent out a cable to all of its station chiefs saying, quote, "The man more responsible than any other for the existence of the Central Intelligence Agency has passed away." Which, very CIA, right? Very blunt, very to the point. But
now back to tweeting.
Yeah, exactly.
Interesting. I did not know that about his death. I did not look that far down his chain.
Yeah.
That is poignant.
That was so that was my little arc of Donovan.
Yeah. Now, can I guess the third William?
I don't know if I'm right, go ahead.
But because a lot of Williams come up, but was it possibly William Colby?
It was not, actually. I thought about talking to him. Do you want to do a quick little side, the secret fourth William?
Yeah, the secret fourth. He's like the fourth Beatle.
Yeah, the Ringo of the Williams here.
So William Colby, this is interesting. This is all I have on him, but he served in the OSS briefly. Afterwards, he practiced law in New York. Do you want to guess whose firm he practiced law in?
Hang on. This is another thing that I believe I remember. No, because all my notes on Colby are more like his Nixon stuff.
Our other New York lawyer, Donovan.
Oh, really?
He worked at his firm.
Interesting.
This is a kind of a point I'm going to be coming back to over and over again, where all these, it's kind of an incestuous, I mean, it's politics. It's the people you know, right? But but he's most notable, William Colby, for being a CIA operative. Mm-hmm. Afterwards, then being the deputy chief of station in Saigon for the CIA in Vietnam, and later becoming the director of the CIA during the Nixon administration. Yeah. Which, do you have anything on?
I mean, I really was just going to sort of say that, like, you know, he was director of Central Intelligence under Nixon. And, you know, it's not like any notable intelligence ops happened during the Nixon administration that we would want to talk about.
Yeah.
Not one, no.
No, not even one.
But Colby is another character I think we'll get to. He's probably going to have his own episode at some point in the future.
Yeah.
All three of the three Williams might, honestly.
They might get their own episode.
Plus the Ringo. But yeah, what's your last note on him?
The last note is that his death is subject of conspiracy theory.
Oh, yes. And
I won't go into it too deep, but essentially in 1996, so let's see, how old was he in 96? He was...
Hang on, can I guess? I think I remember which death this one is. Is he the one who, like, went out with his yacht in the middle of the night without putting his slippers on, or...
No, it was a canoe.
Oh, yeah, canoe, yeah. I remember, like...
Yeah.
Very weird, yeah. Give them the broad strokes.
He went out with a canoe on April 27th, 1996, solo canoe trip in Rock Point, Maryland. And then his canoe was found the next day on a sandbar, and his body was found on a riverbank on May 6th, not too far from where his canoe was found. So notice the time discrepancy. It wasn't too far from where the canoe was found, but it was almost a week later, around a week later. Death ruled accidental. He was apparently predisposed to heart attack or stroke, but likely that caused him to drown in water or have hypothermia. So I thought that was interesting. Is like they gave us 4 different causes of death, even though it was an accident.
Just to see what it was. One of them, I'm sure, will fit. Just sort of throwing several things at the wall.
Well, and one of his son, Carl, suggested that his father suffered from guilt due to his actions in the CIA and committed suicide, but the rest of his family said, no, that's inconsistent with his character. So I'm like, I don't see how that could be a suicide from the information I'm getting, but I'm also like not quite seeing how it was an accident.
Yeah.
I mean, I'm sure something happened, but none of these facts to me seem to add up.
Yeah,
so
I was gonna say,
I see
think
why.
his son Carl was close to it. I think it's that the CIA suffered guilt over his actions at the CIA, and he committed suicide.
Right.
If you catch my drift. But yeah, I've looked into Colby's death a little bit, but I honestly haven't done much aside from going like, that's a little weird. As evidenced by the fact that I thought it was a yacht and not a canoe.
Yeah.
But
and just like being 76 and going on a canoe trip alone. I mean,
in the middle of the night while making dinner. Yeah, it's a strange time to decide you need to take a canoe trip.
Yeah, it is. But okay. Good to know.
Yeah.
Another I think arc we can talk about the CIA. That's another fun ending.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I was gonna say it's you die mysteriously and people speculate forever whether it was a suicide, a murder, or an accident. So the actual third William that I wanted to talk about, another director of Central Intelligence, actually, one William J. Casey. So he's of the 3 Williams, he's the one who I had the least on because he was pretty young during his stint at the OSS.
Yeah.
But he headed the secret intelligence branch of the OSS in Europe, which is no small task. That's a pretty big job.
Yeah.
And he and Donovan, towards the end of the war, also shared several conversations about the fate of the OSS as the war drew to a close. And he was part of Donovan's unsuccessful efforts to preserve the agency. And then the real reason that I wanted to talk about him, much later in life, he served as Ronald Reagan's campaign advisor, helping negotiate his alliance with George H.W. Bush, another noteworthy CIA guy there. And he was
Now, which George Bush was this?
This is H.W. Yeah,
No. Not which George.
It's in the one who
CIA
worked in the
George
mailroom.
Okay, cool.
Yeah. And he was appointed director of Central Intelligence following Reagan's victory, which, that's the sort of thing you do to your campaign advisor normally. But yeah, that's all I really had to say on William J. Casey. Just sort of, again, another familiar face who I'm sure we'll run into again later.
Yeah.
And then the last person that I wanted to profile before we dive into some of their notable actions and operations. I'm just looking at our time here. This is going to run a little long.
It's fine. I think we can.
As I say, I hope you at home are enjoying this ride as much as we are, because we have so much material here.
We could always split into 2 too.
Yeah, we could. Yeah, we'll see if we run long enough. Maybe we'll we'll cover our last boy and then talk about like actions, operations. Yeah, maybe we'll do that. Okay. Anyway, the last guy I want to talk about is our returning champion, Alan Dulles.
Heavyweight.
Yeah, he was recruited by Donovan personally in 1941 and operated out of Switzerland for the duration of the war.
Switzerland.
Collecting intelligence, coordinating missions, most notably Operation Crossbow, which attempted to limit German launches of V-1 and V-2 rockets with dubious success, but he was trying.
That's the word. Dubious success, I think, is a good way to define everything this guy did.
Yeah, I was gonna say, it was either a dubious success or it was a success, but it was dubious.
This is a strange. It doesn't really relate to what we're talking to, but this is a strange anecdote I found on Alan Dulles
Oh,
while
please give me
researching him.
strange
I think
anecdotes
you'll
on this
like
guy.
it. This is while he was working in Bern, Switzerland, doing intelligence. 1917. It says Dulles kept a tennis date with a young lady one Sunday morning instead of meeting with an obscure Russian
Oh, I
revolutionary
do know this one.
named Lenin. Ever afterward, he insisted that anyone who knocked on a case officer's door deserved at least a hearing. And I thought that was, that doesn't connect to anything we're talking about, but I read that and I was like, okay,
Yeah,
weird.
so Dulles was kind of like a bit of a playboy before World War II, because he and John Foster Dulles worked for, I'm forgetting the name of the company, but they actually made lots of deals with prominent German industrialists, things like that. And I'm sure that all those deals fell through
Yeah,
once the
no.
war started and weren't picked up after it ended.
Well, he met Hitler before the war.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But Dulles, that story, I've heard that story before. That really made an impression on him. That realization, like, oh, I need to know everything. It's sort of
Yeah.
like what I take away from that story, right? Like,
Yeah. I need to
he-
be kind of omniscient, essentially.
yeah, I need to have my finger in every pie I possibly can at all times, just in case.
Yeah, which I think when we look at his later career, kind of gives us an understanding.
Explains a little bit, yeah.
Yeah.
Can
I talk about his a couple of his pre-World War II?
Yes,
I guess
absolutely,
foibles?
please.
Okay, so I'm just gonna go through some bullet points of just stuff that's interesting. So in 1921, while at the U.S. Embassy in Istanbul, he helped expose the Protocols of the Elders of Zion as a forgery.
Yeah, I saw that. That was...
And unsuccessfully attempted to persuade the State Department to publicly denounce the forgery. Which,
Yeah, it's the sort of thing where it's like, I don't really know what to take away from that, but it's interesting, right?
It is interesting. He also served as the legal advisor to the Delegation on Arms Limitation of the League of Nations, which is where he met Adolf Hitler, Benito Mussolini, Soviet Foreign Minister Maxim Litvinov, and many more. And I think after his meeting with Hitler, this is very interesting. He wrote to his brother Foster, reassuring him that the conditions under Hitler's regime are not quite as bad as an alarmist friend had indicated. Dulles rarely spoke about his meeting with Hitler, and future CIA director Richard Helms hadn't even heard of this encounter until decades after Dulles' death, expressing shock that his former boss had never told him about it. Also, after a meeting with Nazi propaganda minister Joseph Goebbels, Dulles stated that he was impressed with him, citing his sincerity and frankness during their interaction.
Cool.
So, not a great judge of character, this Dulles.
You mean to tell me that the man who oversaw MK Ultra sometimes made deals with unsavory people?
Yeah.
Spoiler alert. Oopsie.
Yeah. That didn't come up in my information because I didn't look much past the OSS and the forming of the CIA.
Yeah.
So
yeah, I tried, we're trying, we wander out either direction a little bit here, guys, but you can see we're trying to keep it strictly focused on their time in the OSS and then just sort of briefly touching on stuff that they did. But I had just a couple other notes about the OSS. I know you also had notes about this one. In 1945, he was involved with Operation Sunrise, which worked to ensure that American forces, rather than the local and largely communist Italian resistance fighters, controlled the region and the terms of the surrender.
Right.
And so, in doing so, he arranged to protect the General Karl Wolff of the Waffen-SS from prosecution for his numerous war crimes. He committed a lot of war crimes. The Italian front, like the resistance there, is not something that's talked about very often, but it was brutal. And, it's possibly why things like, say, Operation Gladio happened there, is there was a very strong communist presence because of the amount of fascistic violence against these people. Right. And so the fascists doing the violence were understandably a little nervous about what might happen to them once the war ended. And, Dulles, to make a clean surrender, cut a deal with them, which notably goes against I believe it was the Casablanca Agreement, which stated that all surrenders by all surrenders that the Axis forces did must be unconditional. We were
Right.
not allowed to cut deals. You couldn't do like
Yes.
the thing that Hans Landa thinks he's getting at the end of Inglourious Bastards.
Yes.
That's what Alan Dulles did, and you can't do that.
Right.
But he did it
And
anyway.
well, and it would also anger and provoke Soviet suspicion
Mm-hmm.
that the Americans were seeking to sign a separate peace with the Germans, which Wikipedia described as a early episode of the emerging Cold War.
It was also true. That is what we were doing.
That's 100%. Well, can I go ahead and these are my two favorite quotes of my research that I've done. And I wanted to contrast how the CIA historians described this incident versus an outside opinion. So these are two kind of long quotes, but I want to read them both, and then we can kind of come to our own opinions, all right?
Yeah.
So this is from the CIA. Quote, as defeat loomed for the Third Reich in the spring of 1945, Alan Dulles and SI, Special Intelligence,
I believe so.
made one of the OSS's greatest contributions to the war effort.
Dear God.
German generals and officials as high-ranking as SS Chief Heinrich Himmler began floating secret peace proposals to the British and the Americans. While some of these offers were genuine, the Allied, quote, unconditional surrender policy and fear of provoking suspicions of Joseph Stalin constrained American diplomats and intelligence officers who might otherwise have been able to encourage these peace feelers. One important exception was made. Despite the unconditional surrender policy, higher authority in Washington allowed Alan Dulles to meet with SS General Karl Wolff, who had secretly offered to broker a surrender of German forces in Italy. The result of these meetings was Operation Sunrise, a dangerous and devilishly complicated series of contacts over the next several weeks.
All right.
Absolutely. Dulles had to manage the contacts and negotiations from Bern, Switzerland. Time after time, the scheme came right to the edge of breakdown or disaster. But in the end, Sunrise succeeded, bringing about an early end to the Italian campaign in late April 1945 and saving hundreds, if not thousands of lives. End quote. So that's the CIA. We'll comment on that in a second.
Let's
next
take a look
quote,
at your other narrative.
This is from John Kenneth Galbraith, who wrote that Dulles showed himself to be, quote, a master of disastrous ineptitude. In those months, he sent Gary Powers over the Paris summit, helped overthrow the neutralist government of Suvana Pauma in Laos, which later had to be restored, and was the man in charge of the organization that was responsible for perhaps the greatest foul-up in our history, the Bay of Pigs. Mm-hmm. These were not the achievements of a shrewd or even a halfway intelligent administrator. Nor was shrewdness the quality remarked upon by those of us without organizational loyalty who knew him in those years. While such judgment should be offered and received with caution by some, certainly, he was thought amiable, agreeable, but mentally very, very dim. Perhaps, in the most charitable view, he had passed his best by the time of his great fiascos. But beyond doubt that he had not only passed his best, but that his best had never been. Never, not even in the Bay of Pigs, was his capacity for detached misjudgment more disastrous than in his management of Operation Sunrise, as the Wolf negotiations were called. He wanted to go out with a bang. Those who have thought he was foreseeing the Cold War and those who thought he was helping to cause it were both wrong. He was just being Alan Dulles. Which is a scathing but pretty awesome quote.
That's brutal. So I will say, I think he's selling Dulles short here a little bit.
I think so too, a little bit. But
yeah, like you look at things like Operation Paperclip later on, and I think he's laying a groundwork here. But master of complete disaster or something.
Disastrous
ineptitude.
Which
detached misjudgment was also really.
Yeah,
that's a good quote.
It is a good quote, and I agree with a lot of it, and I can understand because this guy was also in intelligence somewhere else, but I can understand his disdain for this guy, but I do think there is, when you look at what Alan Dulles is doing in a lot of situations, he does sort of seem to be bumbling and fumbling his way through certain things. Yeah,
I was gonna say, and to be clear, I never want to make these people seem as though they're like gods amongst men. I mean, I will sometimes
Yeah.
say things like, ice flows through his veins. He's not a normal human. But to be
Like
clear,
Thor of old.
yeah, exactly. Yeah. William J. Donovan, son of Odin. But to be clear, they are just people, and their
Yeah.
mistakes are just bigger than mine, right? Like when I screw up at work, like I shortchange a customer. When
Right.
they screw up at work, the Bay of Pigs goes wrong.
Nuclear war almost happens. Yeah.
Yeah.
Which,
But I also think there was definitely, I think, a little more intentionality to his operations that he's
Yeah.
giving him credit for.
Yeah, and maybe
Uh,
that's due to the people around him, or maybe he's a little bit more, in some cases, a little bit more competent than he's being
mhm.
given credit for. But yeah, I do think that's a good encapsulation of him, if mean encapsulation
Yeah.
of him as just a little bit of an inept administrator.
Yeah,
Yeah.
and I just have two other things that I'd like to say about Alan Dulles, real
Please.
quick, and then we will move on to maybe a part two, or we'll talk about the operations of the OSS. Now we've talked
Yeah.
about some of the guys, which is to say, later on, Alan Dulles, as we've heard in this brilliant quote, headed the Central Intelligence Agency and oversaw such things as the 1953 coup of Iran, the 1954 coup of Guatemala, Project MK Ultra, and of course the Bay of Pigs invasion, the failure of which caused his firing by John F. Kennedy. And my final note, an unrelated note, following President John F. Kennedy's assassination, Alan Dulles served on the Warren Commission to investigate who did it.
And he said,
No
"Guys,
relation between those two things.
who could have done?" I'm just thinking of the meme from
Yeah,
I think you should leave the hot dog
the guy in
suit
the hot dog suit. Yeah,
Who
we're
could
all
have
looking
done-
for the guy who did this.
We're all looking.
And yeah, it's the energy of the Warren Commission. But all of
Yeah.
that is a story for another time.
It is. That's
yeah.
interesting. Well, we can go into some of the operations.
Yeah, for sure.
I don't know if the operations are going to be enough for a.
Yeah, we
another
might
full
actually.
hour.
This might just be a full episode because I did spend more time on the four guys than on the actual operations.
Yeah, same. I was more interested in the characters, but I think there's some interesting stuff. we
So yeah,
can
maybe
talk
you
about,
guys
so-
are just getting a long episode today. But that's
Yeah,
fine.
Lucky you. So I wanted to talk about the morale operations branch
Yes,
of the
please.
OSS, which was I guess you can kind of surmise by the name was targeting morale of the enemy, right?
Mhm.
But and this is again, all these sources I'm about to read to you are from the CIA directly, so take that what
Grain
you
of
will.
salt, if you will.
Grain of salt, supplemented by Wikipedia. But I thought even still, some of these things I'm going to read are very interesting. But William J. Donovan, we're jumping back in time, who's in charge of the OSS, admired the perceived effectiveness of Nazi propaganda and saw the United States' lack of similar operations as a weakness, which is why he created the Morale Operations Branch, which used many different tactics in both informational and kind of physical sides to sap morale, induce confusion, and sow distrust within the populations of Axis country and within the ranks of their armed forces. That doesn't sound familiar to me. That's pretty
Yeah, I've
pretty foreign.
yeah, pretty novel concept.
Yeah. But this is something that's interesting. In a speech delivered by Colonel Donovan, he cited the importance of psychology in addition with physical action during warfare. Quote, the element of surprise in military operations, which is psychological warfare translated into field tactics, is achieved by artifice and stratagem, by secrecy and rapidity of information, by mystifying and misleading the enemy, When you strike at the morale of the people or army, you strike at the deciding factor, because it is the strength of their will that determines the length of wars, the measure of resistance, and the day of final collapse. End quote. So,
No uncertain terms there.
nope. Again, the man with ice in his veins.
Yeah, we know how he feels about this.
I also found this kind of funny. In the same speech, apparently he somewhat incorrectly cited Mein Kampf, which I just that was something Wikipedia said, and I think it's a funny thing. But in a document outlining the purpose that the OSS would serve to President Roosevelt while he was still kind of trying to bring him to his side, he wrote this, quote, "Espionage is not a nice thing, nor are the methods employed exemplary. Neither are demolition bombs, nor poison gas. But our country is a nice thing, and our independence is indispensable. We face an enemy who believes one of his chief weapons is that none but he will employ terror. But we will turn terror against him, or we will cease to exist." End quote. Lots to unpack there. Yeah.
Wow.
Again,
the CIA should that should be branded into the arm of every CIA agent. That is their ethos.
We'll turn terror against them, or we'll cease to exist.
This reminds me of a Muse song, actually, embarrassingly enough, because in high school I was really into them, right? But they had a whole album called Drones, all about drone warfare, and they had a song on there called JFK, which is just a sample of a JFK quote where he's talking about the Soviet Union. He's we're opposed by a force that relies not on armies by day, but guerrillas by night. And every time he says something like that, there's a little guitar point, the point being oh no, we're like the Soviets now. No.
Oh my God.
Yeah, exactly. And obviously sort of trite observation, but listening to that, I was like, wow, that feels exactly the way I felt when I was first listening to it, going wow, maybe America does do bad things sometimes.
Yeah, maybe we're the baddies.
Oh no.
Yeah, I know. It's interesting. Well, and again, I think it's very important to understand the mindset under which the OSS and then CIA were founded, which is a wartime mindset of suspicion and of by any means necessary. And it's if you build that into a bureaucratic system,
that's going to hold over.
Yep. And maybe some not so great things are going to happen. Or maybe everything would be perfectly fine. We can trust the CIA, who's never done anything wrong.
Yeah, that of course is what happened. Fortunately, because could you imagine if it didn't?
Oh, geez. But I'm just gonna bullet point some of the morale operations campaigns and just kind of explain them. So big ones: propaganda leaflets, which they would circulate in enemy territory. Poison pen letters, which were supposed anonymous letters sent to the Gestapo officers that implicated various German soldiers and officials in pro-Allied behavior. So basically just fake snitching on your enemies.
That would look, I'm not going to say I feel bad for a Nazi, but that would really suck. Would suck. You're a true blue Nazi, you're a huge anti-Semite, you hate the West and everything it stands for. And then one day Himmler rolls into your office hey, what's with this letter that you wrote? Telling us that you want to defect to France.
And then he shoots you with the little Han Solo pistol. I forget what those are called. Another thing was death notices, wherein the MO sent letters to the families of German soldiers indicating that the recently deceased was a victim of a mercy killing at the hands of a German doctor, and that Nazi party officials had stolen valuable possessions while he lay on his deathbed. Which is so immoral.
That's insane.
You're that is so psychotic. I could not even I had to read that 5 times to wrap my mind around it.
See, I read that they did death notices, and I just assumed that meant they were falsely saying that people had died. I had no idea that that's what they were doing. That's
horrible.
That's
and
psychotic.
Obviously, you can tell what it's to turn civilians against the government.
Yeah.
Which, radio broadcasts were often used. Radio propaganda broadcasts, and you'll appreciate this. The Joker campaign,
Oh, okay. I'm
which I thought
listening.
you'd like that, which is where an MO agent pretended to be German General Ludwig Beck, blaming German losses on Nazi incompetence and urging the German people to overthrow Hitler via radio broadcast.
Interesting.
Yeah. And then finally, carefully formulated rumors designed to cause confusion, sow distrust, and ultimately incite revolt or assassination attempts in Axis-occupied territory. That doesn't sound familiar at all.
Yeah,
Huh.
no, that doesn't sound
Yeah.
familiar at all. Although the assassination attempt thing does remind me. I forgot to mention this while we were talking about Alan Dulles.
Yeah.
But he was. It's weird. Sources are conflicted on this, but it's believed that he was tied up in a plot to kill Hitler prior to World War II. Or was this the one prior to World War II, or is this one during? Because there were also a couple plots prior.
He was involved with the ones. He was involved with at least one during.
Yeah, maybe I'm thinking of the one during. Maybe I'm thinking of someone else who plotted to kill him beforehand. But
Interesting.
yeah, and I just wanted to make note of that.
Yeah.
But none of them could do what Hitler did, which is to say, kill Hitler.
Kill himself. Yeah.
But sometimes it takes one to get one, as they say.
Yeah. How true. How true. Or it takes one to flee to Argentina. Live out the rest of his days peacefully with Elvis.
Yeah. Do you have anything
that's all I
more
had
on there?
them.
Okay. Yeah,
No.
I'll just touch on a couple other things that when I just I read several summaries of their various actions and operations, and I just sort of put some things that caught my eye. So first of all, obviously, this is the thing that everybody talks about because it's the stuff that's genuinely cool, which is they produce numerous the James Bond spy gadgets, right? They had silenced pistols, they had grenades that exploded upon impact after being thrown, which sounds kind of trite now, but that's pretty cool when you actually think about it.
Right. That is cool.
Yeah, they had bombs disguised as lumps of coal, which that feels like cheating, right? You just wait for a guy to pick it up and throw it into a train and then it explodes.
It just
kind
feels
of
so
poor
rude.
sportsmanship, but
But
it's
one way I describe the OSS, it's poor sportsmanship.
tasteless poison pills, which could be slipped into a sandwich or something like that.
Jeez.
And cigarettes laced with a primitive chemical that was designed to make the target more talkative, like a primitive truth serum, basically. Which
did it work?
I couldn't find any results on that, which tells me yes. But
brought to you by the wonderful minds that brought you MK Ultra.
Yeah, exactly. They're a couple other notes that caught my attention. Their training area B, which is one of their domestic training areas, which is focused on the most classically cloak and dagger ops, that's where they train their straight up assassins, is now Camp David, the retreat area for the president and his family. I didn't really have anything to say about that. Just kind of, it's a message, right? That's a good message. Personally, I think, just that's a way to, you've got the cloak, and then there's just a dagger forever hovering above them, spiritually speaking, in the history of the land. They also trained and armed groups hostile to the people that we were at war with. Now, this in particular is something that never happened again.
No,
never. Two people in particular who I want to focus on were Mao and the Red Army in China were trained and armed by us, and the Viet Minh forces in French Indochina. And one OSS officer in particular, Archimedes Patty was his name, frequently met and spoke with one Ho Chi Minh, who later on had some relevance. Side note about this Archimedes guy, he in 1981 was interviewed about the Vietnam War, and this is just a little quote I wanted to read. In my opinion, the Vietnam War was a great waste. There was no need for it to happen in the first place. At all. None whatsoever. During all the years of the Vietnam War, no one ever approached me to find out what happened in 1945 or in 44. In all the years I spent at the Pentagon, Department of State, and in the White House, never was I approached by anyone in authority. However, I did prepare a large number, and I mean about, over 15 position papers on our position in Vietnam, but I never knew what happened to them. Those things just disappeared. They just went down the dry well.
Hmm.
Which ominous, especially that like
Yeah.
no one ever approached me to find out what happened. It's like, what were you up to?
What happened?
Also, just Italian excellence. He was an American, Italian American, so just had to
Although
shout
with
that out.
Archimedes, that sounds like a Greek name.
I know it's very these
That's a sick
Mediterranean
name,
peoples.
yeah.
But yeah, and he left the region in 45 after French allegations that the Americans were attempting to foment a revolution, which I guess we were, considering what Ho Chi Minh and his buddies later got up to. But again, the same as like, this is obviously, these are more extreme examples than
Right.
William Stevenson founding the OSS functionally, but the same thing, right? Like, we, in order to make sure there's someone friendly to our interests, we gas someone up, we set them up, and then we just send them off, and then sometimes they do their own thing. And that thing isn't always what we anticipated, whether that be, the Red Army in China, or whether that be, a certain freedom fighter in Afghanistan in the 80s. The brave Mujahideen fighters of Afghanistan.
As Rambo 3
Rambo
will tell
3
you.
famously dedicated its movie to.
Interesting. Well, here's the thing, Matt. So, and you don't have kids, so you don't understand this. But sometimes you have children, and sometimes they make you proud. Sometimes they make mistakes. And sometimes they fly a 747 airliner.
Sometimes they do 9/11.
Sometimes they do a 9/11. And you just have to live with that as a parent.
Where did I go wrong? Finally,
where did I go wrong? Destabilizing your country.
Destabilizing your country and training and arming you. But finally, if you don't have anything more to say about their operations, I have one little operation that I want to talk about. Speaking of 9/11, which is to say, this is I could not find anything on this outside of the Wikipedia page. I searched the OSS Society, I searched the CIA website, I searched the National Archives. I couldn't find anything on this, but they apparently at one point had a plot to spread anthrax throughout Spain using weaponized insects.
I saw that.
And now, so I was so curious about this that I tried to find the book that the Wikipedia article cited. And I couldn't. Like, it was like $200 to get it on Amazon, what I was looking at. And I couldn't find a PDF anywhere. But I just think, same as like all these other things that the OSS is doing, these like weird echoes, doing civilian anthrax attacks, possibly, in the build up to a war, just a weird echo to the, the anthrax that was mailed to several journalists and high-ranking U.S. officials immediately following the September 11th attacks, and was traced directly back to a government lab. That's a little weird, right? Just I don't know. I read that, and I don't know. It was just like my eye opened, right? That eye emoji that you're talking about. I was like, it was just a weird echo, right? Like
that is a I often think of the George Lucas quote when he was talking about the prequel trilogy of Star Wars, where he says it's like poetry, it rhymes. And that's how I feel researching a lot of these like early progenitors to the later,
it really is. It is like watching a prequel, right? We're like, oh hey, there's that character I like, but he's a little younger. He hasn't quite figured it out yet.
Yeah. The writing's not as good. It's a little more boring, a little more bureaucratic.
But yeah, and then finally, before we close, I've just got just a little dessert for everybody. I have a list of celebrities who were linked to the OSS, who like worked for them in some capacity. And some of these are pretty famous. Others drove me insane. First we have Mo Berg. This is one of the most famous ones. He was a baseball player, really, really smart guy. Polymath, pretty famously spoke a bunch of languages, and he used that to his advantage. Really smart guy, and apparently also a pretty good baseball player. Also, one Douglas Fairbanks Jr. And I don't really have much to say about him, other than the fact that he was an actor, and he is he's quite a handsome man. I looked him up and I was like, oh wow, hello, sir.
Oh yes.
Yeah, if you want to entrap me into the CIA. It's too late because Douglas Fairbanks Jr. isn't around to seduce
right.
me anymore.
All it takes is a man with a pencil-thin mustache, huh?
Well, now don't get any ideas. But also, this one I didn't know about, but my mom did. I mentioned this in passing to my mom, and she was like, "Oh yeah, I knew about this," which is to say, Julia Child, the like the celebrity chef.
I'm sorry. What?
She got her start working at the OSS, reporting directly to Donovan. I think it was in Laos. I don't remember where she was stationed. And then she worked with the CIA for a while too, as well, and reportedly honed her love of cooking during her assignments for the OSS.
Oh boy, you just made me spiral, dude.
Right? This is what I'm saying. Like,
Yeah, she was in Sri Lanka.
yeah. So I was in the general region.
My mom loves Julie Childs, and she watches like her cooking on rerun or whatever.
Yeah.
So I cannot wait to just
Just be like-
absolutely drop that on her.
Yeah, and the thing I'd like to note about all of these celebrities, including the ones I'm about to talk about, so remember, as soon as the war was over, the OSS stopped contacting them, and they never had any dealings with U.S. intelligence again. And there's no reason that the CIA would say benefit from having people like this in their pocket. Also, on a related note, the psychologist Carl Jung, who helped them with psychological studies, is all that I could find on that.
Oh, no.
I believe there were also like documents saying that like no one there was, I don't remember who it was who said this because I didn't find this in my research. This is just something I'm possibly incorrectly remembering, but like a quote where someone was like, "No one will ever understand the true depth of the help that Jung has done us in our research," which ominous. And also the authors John Steinbeck, author of like Grapes of Wrath and Of Mice and Men, and most interestingly, Ernest Hemingway. Now, Hemingway,
we know he was in. Yeah, we know he was in World War II. If you ever read any of his books,
yeah, right? I was gonna say I couldn't shut up about it. But yeah, so Hemingway's an interesting figure, right? His writing has been very important to me. Like every depressed 20-something, right? Like I love Hemingway.
I've never read Hemingway. I tried to read A Farewell to Arms, but I only tried to read that because there was a Streetlight Manifesto song called A Call to Arms, which was slightly based off that, which is probably the lamest way to try and get into Hemingway. But I remember trying to read it, and I was like 19, and he's like manipulating a woman or something, and I was like, this is weird, and I put it down. That's my Hemingway story.
Fair enough, honestly. Fair enough. But yeah, so Hemingway's interesting because he spent a lot of time in Cuba later on in his life.
Right.
So when I learned that he was contacted by the predecessor to the OSS,
oh boy,
alarm bells went off in my head. And so I started doing a little more research.
Well, now, Matt, what was in Cuba that was so important?
And now I found something possibly even crazier than the idea that he was an OSS asset, which is that prior to working for the OSS, he was recruited by the NKVD, which was the Soviet predecessor to the KGB. During his time in the Spanish Civil War, because he hated fascism, much more than he felt aligned with any other cause. He hated fascism, which, fair enough. I do too. I hate fascism. I'm very much opposed to it.
I love it.
No.
No, I'm just kidding.
But so he worked with the NKVD for a little bit before he was recruited by the OSS, and later on seems to have regretted it, especially once the Red Scare started heating up, and being a communist spy wasn't particularly good. It wasn't a good time to be a communist spy. So he rebuffed their advances.
It's like being a
after
comedian in 2022.
Yeah, right, exactly. Which is to say, you're a truth teller, wrongfully persecuted by the crowds. But yeah, so that was very interesting. And also, lest any of you worry that Hemingway tried to betray his friends, Fidel Castro and Che Guevara, he seems to have left Cuba right around the time that they really heated up their anti-American rhetoric. He was with them during the revolution and actually wrote several letters celebrating their victory over the Batista regime because, again, he hated fascists.
Anti-fascist.
But that was just an interesting note. he pretty much once they really started drawing the ire of the Americans, he moved to Idaho instead.
And committed suicide.
Which who knows if this is related, but he
I doubt it has nothing to do with that.
So there were a couple other celebrities, like the director John Ford, for instance, worked with them, and another one. This one was one of the lowest like levels of collaboration, but interesting on a personal note. Which is to say that Bing Crosby worked with them, like recording songs in favor of like killing Nazis and stuff. And that's only really interesting because right above me, like the floor above me in my house, we have a framed photo of Bing Crosby because my great-grandfather worked as a singer and was good friends with Bing Crosby. So we have a photo of him like playing guitar for Crosby while they sang to U.S. troops. So not like an important thing at all, really. Just sort of weird that I was like, oh, maybe my great-grandfather was singing for the OSS. Who knows?
Suddenly I can't trust you anymore.
Yeah, exactly. I was gonna say I wanted to put this card out there on the table right now.
Yeah.
He was just Irish. I promise. Not an asset of Donovan.
I forgot to mention that I am in direct lineage of William J. Donovan. I figure I should probably put that out on the table.
Actually, speaking of Donovan, though, one other thing I forgot to mention about him when I was listing off like the operations. When I said that his Catholicism wouldn't come up, I was lying. It was a little deception for you. He had a network of priests connecting all the way to the Vatican, who he used to sort of like funnel information around during World War II. Now, if there's anything you can think of that might connect assets of the CIA and Catholic priests, well, I'm sure it didn't start here, is all I have to say about that.
What does the CIA and Catholic priests have in common?
It's the fact that they always do good things.
They dress up very well.
Yeah. Yeah, they're out there putting out finders, if you would. But we'll address that on a later episode.
That's dark.
Yeah.
That's dark.
But I read that, and that was another thing. Eyebrows sort of raised.
That is like, if I had to sum up all of our research, is there's not a lot concrete we can take away from it other than eyebrows raised.
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Yeah, like we said, we're in the prelude. We're watching all of these, like we're watching the foundations get laid for this thing that, like I said, that's why I wanted to focus on the OSS. Is we see so many of the big characters, so many of like the big strategies getting tested out, sort of like putting their feet in the water, and things pick up steam pretty quickly after this, once the CIA gets running. But, story for another time.
Well, do you think that's it? Is there anything else you want to say?
I think
Any
that's
grand
it.
takeaway?
Yeah, I think that's our big takeaway. Really is. It's all connected. But I'm told that you have an outro that you want to try out. So
sure, but
I'll let you take this one in. Oh yes,
let's say follow us on Instagram at Historica Esoterica.
Yeah, you can do. It's just the name of the podcast on Instagram, and then Twitter.
Some fun little art I did.
Yeah, Twitter was rude to us and wouldn't let us do the full name. So
Hist Esoteric.
Yeah, so it's Twitter. Like the start of history and then esoteric.
And you can follow me. I did make a Twitter. I
did.
I made a Twitter. It's at Detective Roswell, only one L because it ran out of characters. I've got 12 followers, and let's see if we can get it to 15 people. I think we can. If we all band together.
You can follow me at Matt K Ultra on Twitter, Matt_K_Ultra on Instagram, and use any of these avenues to reach out. Suggest topics. Let us know what you think. We want some feedback. Let us know what you're thinking of the show so far.
Yeah. And with that, until next time, dear listeners, the devil is real and he's trying to get you.
No.
It's a great honor for me this evening to come out of the shadows after a very long career at CIA and help celebrate General Donovan. General Wild Bill Donovan was no summer soldier. He was no sunshine patriot. So as we raise our glasses, I would say, may General Donovan rest in peace, knowing that his direct lineal successors carry the banner of the nation's Constitution, her democratic principles, and the cause of freedom.